the U.S. Urging Israel to spare civilian life. The guns started talking again while the U.S. Secretary of State was still in the region. Antony Blinken, who blames Hamas for the return to fighting.
I made clear that after the pause, it was imperative that Israel put in place clear protections for civilians and for sustaining humanitarian assistance going forward. It's also important to understand why the pause came to an end. It came to an end because of Hamas. Hamas reneged on commitments it made. In fact, even before the pause came to an end, it committed an atrocious terrorist attack in Jerusalem, killing 3 people, wounding others, including Americans. It began firing rockets before the pause had ended, and as I said, it reneged on the commitments it made in terms of releasing certain hostages.
Well, for more, let's go to Tel Aviv. Harel Chorev is head of the Middle East desk for the Middle East Network Analysis Center at the Dayan Center, at Tel Aviv University. Thank you for speaking with us here on France 24. A lot to unpack in what we just heard there from the U.S. Secretary of State. What have you been able to parse as to why the truce collapsed?
The truce collapsed because, the Hamas probably reached to an understanding that Israel will start one way or another or fulfill its promise to initiate again the attack against Hamas if they will fail to provide the kidnapped which they did. Yesterday, they were trying to trade 3 bodies instead of 3 alive kidnapped. And I think anyone who watched the scene could understand that we're reaching to an end in that phase, in the current phase at least, and that fire will be resumed very soon. I think Hamas wanted to make the first step because we need to remember that part of the Hamas message during all this time, including during the ceasefire, is we're in control. We are releasing kidnapped even from the center of Gaza, which is surrounded by Israeli forces. And this is part of this message, actually.
Part of the message? I mean, they're still holding, what, an estimated 80 hostages?
Oh, no, more. Something like around 140. I don't know exactly because unfortunately, every now and then we hear about the finding of another body or 2 bodies. We were just being told about new 3 bodies of kidnapped that were murdered in the Hamas captivity, and it's so the number changes frequently. But we're still talking about a significant number of hostages being held by Hamas.
So who controls the narrative right now? You seem to be implying that Hamas does.
I don't think they're controlling the narrative. I think there is a huge void between what Hamas thinks the situation is and what it really is. I think they're not aware. They're in a certain euphoria regarding their position. They are hoping that the international community will come to save them. They think they have the time. Frankly, I don't think this is the situation. I don't think they really understand how much the public in Israel is determined this time to eliminate Hamas. And the reason is that not only the October 7th horrifying events are still echoing, but rather the news stories that we're getting from the hostages, for example, starving, beating with the electricity cables, pointing guns to 12-year children. That makes the Israeli public furious. Rapes. That makes the Israeli public furious, and I think Hamas is not aware that this won't be another round, and it, of course, affects its judgment.
Yeah, at the same time, though, this Friday, that you've described the mood inside of Israel. Outside of Israel, they're sharing, for instance, images on social media of the leaflets that were dropped telling people where to go to safe zones, saying there's confusion. We don't know how many civilians have been killed in Gaza this Friday. In the rest of the world, the focus and the images are squarely about Palestinian civilians.
Well, I mean, if you want, anyone, I mean, can find many videos of Hamas fighting in civilians' clothing, not in uniforms. And then, when they die, they present it as civilians. Today, we need to remember that the targeted attacks today by Israel were immediately after this ceasefire where Israel could really gather a lot of information and therefore to execute those attacks. So I can assure you that any one of the, Hamas is reporting about 21 who died, are probably part of this, part of the Hamas infrastructure, even if they are dressed as civilians. Really, I cannot express how much we are aware here about the downside of hitting civilians, innocent civilians. It's not something that we just say, okay, this is the Second World War, let's kill everybody. That's not the atmosphere ever, wasn't the atmosphere in Israel. We are only interested in eliminating Hamas military power. And so I think this is what we saw today, whatever Hamas will present it.
Again, that's how you feel inside of Israel. The headlines read bombings in Khan Yunis and Rafah. So the question again is to a certain degree, Hamas winning the public relations war?
Well, first of all, it's social media and all those echo chambers there, which you cannot really penetrate. There is a narrative, there is a fake news, and, go fight against fake news. When someone wants to believe something, he's in this echo chamber, he will never go out. We know this phenomenon not from today, not from yesterday. It's a really an established phenomenon, and presenting them as civilians. Having said that, we need to remember we are talking about a vicious enemy that, when you hear about the October 7th and the way they tortured, kidnapped, you see that they have no limits in terms of any humanitarian standard. And therefore, they're using the civilians as human shields. And this is not a new thing. It's not that we're having bases of Hamas that everybody knows where they are. They're using them under hospitals. By the way, take note how many of the hospitals in Gaza were proved to be bases of Hamas.
Harel Chorev, you mentioned at the outset of the conversation how the writing was on the wall that this truce was coming to an end.
True.
And part of that on Thursday was the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken cautioning his hosts to try to spare civilian lives. What's your sense of what the conversation was in private?
Well, I think on private, Antony Blinken said, listen, we have our own problems within the Democratic Party or its voters. Please do your best. And one of the outcomes is this map. I don't know if you
So it's
saw
just please do your best. It wasn't pressure at all on Netanyahu?
Listen, anyone who knows the Gaza Strip as an arena, as a military arena, knows that it's almost impossible to do something there without, collateral damage, whatever you're going to do. So he asked Israel, of course, to do its best. I actually think that what we saw today was probably the most precise targeting that you can think of or plan, because it came after a long ceasefire, which allowed, as I said, Israel to gather information, and therefore you saw it right on the first 2 hours or so. And as I said before, we saw that plan, which is obviously an outcome of the American pressure to do something and to avoid of evacuating civilians or creating a huge humanitarian crisis. A map that actually divided the Gaza Strip into dozens and dozens of areas. And while the IDF is instructing people to move from one area to another, and by that trying to avoid, masses immigration, because it's going to be a problem, no doubt about it. This is a very, very tough urban jungle. And I'm sure the IDF is trying to do its best to avoid the human casualties, regardless of Hamas' interest to use them as human shields.
Even if they do spare a maximum number of civilian lives, they'll be destroying buildings. There'll be more people displaced. How much time realistically does Israel have?
Well, I think that taking into account the backing from the U.S. and from other friends of Israel around the world, particularly Germany, I think that all of them are aware of what happened on October 7th and that we cannot go back to October 6th in that term, and Hamas need to be removed. You know, if Hamas, as a historian of the Palestinians and the Middle East, who really taking off or rid of Hamas as the most negative player in the last 30 years, who acted openly against any settlement with Israel, I think will have a very positive effect eventually, despite of all what we're going to go through, unfortunately, in the coming months. I think it would the effect.
So you're saying it's going to be months? You think there's going to be months of war?
Unfortunately, I think it's going to take months or many weeks, because it won't be a walk in the park. As we see that it's not a normal war. It's, you know, when you're torturing a 12-year-old kid, there is something deeper there in the level of hate and radicalism, which is much more like Hitler in a bunker rather than any other war that we are used to. Okay, it's like.
But if your prediction is true that it is weeks or even months of war, aren't you going to be manufacturing another cycle of hate?
No doubt about it, but you know, it would be like to ask France in 1944 or 1945 if they're not afraid of creating another cycle of hate with Germany. You're saying, okay, enough is enough. We need to finish with this Nazi enemy and to de-radicalize it. And of course, with all the investment and everything that needs to be side to side after this de-Hamasisation of the Gaza Strip. But we cannot really, you know, go half and half. It won't work. The next round would be even more difficult and bloody. And I think after so many years of bloodshed, that this needs to be concluded once and for all, and to create a different atmosphere for both Israelis and Palestinians.
De-radicalization after World War II, well, that led to the creation of the European Union, economic cooperation between the French and the Germans. Benjamin Netanyahu has not been a big advocate of making peace with the Palestinians in his decades in power.
Well, I won't defend Benjamin Netanyahu, but I think the picture is much more complex. Being fully aware of what happened during those years, the Palestinians, Mahmoud Abbas was not really a partner in so many senses. You can ask the Americans about it, but. You know, I think Netanyahu won't stay after this war in power, and you have enough people in Israel who wants to make peace with the Palestinians. And by the way, again, I'm not sure that Benjamin Netanyahu didn't want to. He was always afraid from this scenario that we're living at the moment. It's not something theoretical anymore. It was always on the table. After withdrawing from the Gaza Strip in 2005, we saw the process. It was there. If you leave a place, for example, the West Bank, will the Israelis would be attacked by a semi-state terror state? Well, the answer is yes, a clear yes. So, but still, let's leave it optimistic. I really think that after the removal of Hamas and the creation of a new atmosphere, a lot of investment in the Gaza Strip, really, we can take it to a much better place.
Harel Chorev, I want to thank you so much for joining us from Tel Aviv.
Thank you.